I'm not just going to be talking about the players that had the best week 6. Instead, I'm going to be talking about the guys that are actually moving up my rankings, such as Tank Dell. Now, Dell isn't moving up as much as some of the guys later on in this video, but nonetheless, we actually get confirmation here that the buy low call a couple weeks back wasn't the worst thing in the world. Obviously, you need the Nico Collins injury, but Nico going down all of a sudden has opened up Dell for this week to see a season high with his targets with 9, a season high with 7 receptions, and a season high of 18.7 fantasy points. Also, if you actually go through and look at this chart from PFF, you will see that Tank Dell actually plays the highest percentage of snaps for this Houston Texans offense for all of 2024. He was up here at 49 snaps. He ran 32 routes on 35 potential CJ Stroud dropbacks. So all of a sudden, Tank Dell has turned into an every down player for this Houston Texans offense. And we should still expect that CJ Stroud is one of the more efficient quarterbacks going into the future. While I didn't like Tank Dell in drafts this year, mainly because the size and the situation, I will give him the benefit of the doubt, or at least give him his flowers, right? And that if you go through and if you look at Tank Dell as a rookie, we'd have to remember that he was an extremely strong option. Now, I do want to reiterate, yes, it was a small sample. Yes, he was a very old rookie, very undersized. So all the red flags you had coming into the year and why you probably shouldn't have drafted him where he was going. But still, you had some massive blow-up weeks where you had a game against the Cardinals, 149 receiving yards, 114 and 2 touchdowns against the Bucks, 145 receiving yards and the receiving touchdown against the Jacks. I think you could see some of these blow-up weeks for Tank Dell coming into the future. And I actually have moved Tank Dell up to wide receiver 29 in my rest of season rankings. I have him in the same range as Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave, and Brandon Ayuk. But obviously, if Nico Collins does come back in about 4 weeks, then at that point, you should be moving Tank Dell back down, and he would go back to just being a fringe flex play rather than an every week wide receiver 2 starter. Now, Chris Godwin's also going to be down here with the guys that aren't moving up a ton. And the reason for this is Godwin was already a top 12 wide receiver for us coming into the week after yet again another phenomenal performance here. Obviously, I need to talk about Chris Godwin. The man just dropped 35 points, and we did move him ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr. in our rest of season ranks. We have Godwin now wide receiver 11 in our rest of season rankings, right in the same range as Drake London, Garrett Wilson, and Cooper Kupp. And to be honest with you, if you wanted to take Godwin over all these other receivers, I'm not going to fault you for doing so whatsoever. If you go through and look at the consistency that you've had from Godwin so far this season, playing out of the slot, 8 targets, 9 targets, 9 targets, 6 targets, 13 targets. Now, of course, I do want to reiterate, these big, massive weeks with 20, 30 fantasy points, they are really going to fluctuate, kind of go back and forth between Godwin and Mike Evans. So if you have Godwin on your team and all of a sudden somebody in your league thinks that he is to the level of A.J. Brown, to the level of Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, I would reiterate, I probably would be willing to throw him on the trade block and actually move off of him. But obviously, if you're coming off a couple dud weeks where you had 11, 12 fantasy points and people are viewing him more so as a low-end wide receiver 2, you should probably be looking to buy. So really, you're going to have some massive spikes, some pretty low lows for Evans and Godwin. I still definitely prefer Chris Godwin over Mike Evans rest of season, similar to what we had coming into this week, because the lows for Godwin are a little bit higher than the lows that we have seen with Evans so far this season. Now, going over to Evan Ingram, it is hilarious to say that any player in this Jacksonville Jaguars offense is moving up rankings. I want to say with Lawrence under center, with Doug Peterson as the head coach, it's very hard to be confident with anybody in Jacksonville. I mean, really the only thing that I'm super confident in fantasy football is that Josh Allen is going to have at least 1 yard tonight. And if you think that's going to happen, you can actually get a free square of Josh Allen, more than less than half a total yard for Underdog Fantasy tonight with promo code FLOCK. Code FLOCK will also get you a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you'll be getting a free team review in the live streams that we are doing every single day. Just make sure that you use promo code FLOCK with the link in the description. And if you wanted to pair that Josh Allen free pick with something else in the game tonight, I'm looking at Garrett Wilson for higher than 58.5 receiving yards. But with Evan Ingram, I do want to give the man his flowers as well, and that he comes out in a game where the Jacksonville Jaguars just simply cannot move the ball down the field. And we actually get Ingram in with 10 targets and 10 receptions, 102 receiving yards. And if you go back to what we had in 2023, this was very consistent with the usage that we had back last season. You go back to last year to end the year, 13 targets, 6 targets, 15 targets, 6 targets, 12 targets, 9 targets, 8 targets, 6 targets, 7 targets, 10 targets. Obviously, week 6 is not going to be thrown in these rankings just yet. But if we go ahead and if we look at the most targeted tight ends that you've had in fantasy football so far this season, at least through the first 5 weeks, you actually had Brock Bowers at number 1 with 36, Parkinson with 32, Kelsey with 31, McBride with 30. But pretty much with the very best tight ends, what we had seen is we had seen an average of about 6 targets per contest so far going into week 6. Now Evan Ingram coming in, actually repeating what he did last year where you had the 143 targets. This looks to be a tight end that you can consistently start in a full PPR format. Now, I will say if you look at the historical touchdown rate for Evan Ingram, should be lower than a lot of these other tight ends, and you will have some of these other tight ends in better offenses as well. I still definitely prefer the names like Kelsey, Bowers. I just think he's a better tight end at this point of his career. And I think I would definitely prefer Trey McBride, George Kittle. Those 4 tight ends are very, very easily over Evan Ingram for me. But then outside of that, I have Evan Ingram in the range of Sam Laporta, Jake Ferguson, and Dalton Kincaid. And very reasonably, as I get some more time to think about this, I think you could move Evan Ingram ahead of some of these other names. Now, going over to our next riser, we are going to have DeAndre Swift. With Swift, I don't know if I just didn't want to believe it because I had him in the Flock League and I was so burned of what we had early in the season. But now this is the 3rd straight week where you've had 20 plus fantasy points for DeAndre Swift. And if you were looking at the total touches that you've had for Swift through the first 6 weeks, let me just get out the little calculator here. But he has to be near the top of the NFL, not in total rushing attempts, but in terms of just total opportunities with the touches that he has seen. I mean, right now you are sitting with a total of 114 opportunities in the form of carries and targets, which is good for almost 20 opportunities a game for DeAndre Swift. And the issue that you had at the very beginning of the season was this was a very bad Chicago Bears offense, an offense that was not able to move the ball down the field. The offensive coordinator looked like a debacle. Caleb Williams looked like he was the mistake at number 1, and they should have gone with Jaden Daniels instead. But now we are getting a little bit of a trend here with Caleb Williams. Obviously, Caleb Williams moves up these rankings as well. And really, everybody here in Chicago looks much more appealing. But I really want to focus in on Swift because Swift is the guy that went from being unstartable to now all of a sudden looking like a potential league winner. And I have moved DeAndre Swift up to being a mid running back 2 as somebody that is a must-start option regardless of matchup every single week. I have him in the same range as our rest of season rankings with Josh Jacobs, Aaron Jones, and Christian McCaffrey. Now, going into the bye week in week 7, it does suck that I'm not going to be able to start DeAndre Swift this week myself, but obviously here in the long term, I am excited. Now, going over to our next name, we are going to have Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard is another one of these running backs that are just seeing consistent opportunities and consistent work. Now, the reason I'm putting Pollard as a bigger riser this week than what we have with Swift is based around the injury that you have with Tajay Spears. Because previously what you had at the beginning of the season is we had Spears coming in and actually operating as a receiving back in some ways. Obviously, Pollard still had a great receiving role in his own right. But now that Spears potentially is set to miss some time, all of a sudden Pollard is probably going to be taking the additional targets out of the backfield as well. We can go through and look weekly at the opportunities he has had in this backfield, where week 1, you get 20. Week 2, we get 23. Week 3, you get 10. Week 4, you get 22. And then in week 6, you get 20 as well. So this is another running back that is seeing the consistent work, both as a receiver as well as a rusher. Now, the difference that we have with Swift versus Eckler is just in my mind, I feel a little bit more comfortable projecting out the Chicago Bears offense going into the future than I would with the Tennessee Titans. Now, obviously, we are still waiting for information regarding this injury to Tyjae Spears. I think we could end up moving Pollard up a bit or down a bit based off what we hear with Spears. If Spears should be good to go this next week and Brian Robinson looks like he's trending towards being healthy, Brian Robinson definitely moves ahead of Tony Pollard in our rest of season rankings. But if you actually have Spears looking like he'll miss some time, I think I would rather have Tony Pollard over DeAndre Swift at that point. But regardless, Swift and Pollard are both must-start running back twos for you every single week, regardless of what the matchup is in a full PPR league. Now, going over to somebody else who's slowly but surely becoming that as well, we are going to have J.K. Dobbins. Where J.K. Dobbins, you know what? Now that we think about this, he was never a high-volume rusher in Baltimore. The 25 rush attempts, the 27 total touches that he had in this game, I would not be surprised if this was not only a season high, but instead if this was a career high. I mean, to skim through this real quick and to see the previous career high for touches in a game for J.K. Dobbins, I mean, he did not come remotely close to this in 2022. Did not, obviously, 2023, we know what happened. And even going back to his rookie season, this may have been the first game that you have ever had from J.K. Dobbins in his NFL career with 20-plus touches. I think we can confirm that it is. Dear God. Dobbins, finally you get the workload. Obviously, he's been an efficient running back through his entire career. We know that this is a Chargers offense that wants to run the ball over and over and over again. He was a clear buy low candidate coming out of the bye week in week 5. There's going to be a healthier offensive line, a healthier Justin Herbert, and better matchups were on the horizon for J.K. Dobbins. Now you sprinkle in the fact that you actually have Gus Edwards on the IR. I understand that Kamani Vidal actually did take some production here. I know that some people may actually use this to hold it against Dobbins, or Vidal does actually have the long receiving touchdown where he has, 40 receiving yards and the receiving TD. Darius Davis has a couple carries. Hassan Haskins has a couple carries. But if you look at the underlying snaps in this backfield, you actually had a total of 57 snaps going in the direction of J.K. Dobbins and only 19 snaps going in the direction of Kamani Vidal. So Dobbins is the true 3-down running back here. I'm really not too concerned about that. I definitely think you could pick up Vidal. We'll talk about it in the waiver wire video tomorrow. Just make sure you're subscribed. But right now we have Dobbins as RB22 in our rest of season ranks. Definitely somebody that I think you should probably be starting most weeks, especially as we go through the buys. The only hesitation that I would have in terms of putting him ahead of DeAndre Swift or putting him ahead of Tony Pollard is we make our rankings over on flockfantasy.com for a full PPR format. And in a full PPR league, you won't have the same level of receiving usage for Dobbins as you're getting with the other players. Now let's go ahead and let's dive into Chase Brown. Chase Brown just posted his third week straight of double-digit fantasy points. This was the third week straight of over 14 fantasy points. Is that the reason he is rising? No, of course not. The reason that he is rising is this is the first week that we have had for Chase Brown where you actually see more snaps played for Brown than Zach Moss. We talked about this in terms of panicking regarding with Moss, but Chase Brown has been the more efficient running back all year. Zach Moss has had the opportunity all season, but it looks like this coaching staff is going to be using the Zach Moss fumble to actually swing things in the favor of Chase Brown. At least that's what we had with this game against the New York Giants. Now, with that being said, it's not a guarantee that Chase Brown is for sure the starting running back for Cincinnati rest of season. In my rest of season rankings, I am putting Chase Brown as a low-end RB2, high-end RB3. I'm putting him alongside these guys like Nick Chubb, Chuba Hubbard, Kareem Hunt, Najee Harris. If you thought, or if we get confirmation that Chase Brown is the starting running back for the Bengals going into the future, Chase Brown will move dramatically up these rankings. On the other hand, there is that outside chance that we get to week 7, all of a sudden the Bengals think that Zach Moss learned his lesson and that Zach Moss is going to go back into the game and he is going to take the role that he had previously. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. I don't want to rank Chase Brown up in the same range as DeAndre Swift and Tony Pollard, just because we can't say for certain at this point that he is the 3-down guy, but he definitely has that upside. And if you believe that he is, I would highly recommend even buying him high, because I think he could be a low-end RB1, high-end RB2 in fantasy rest of the way if he has the job for what should be a phenomenal Bengals offense. Now, I think that's all I got for you. I really do appreciate you. And of course, if you wanted to tell me with those underdog picks, we're going to be going with Garrett Wilson, higher than 58.5 receiving yards. You can pair that up with the Josh Allen, higher than half a total yard. If you're new to Underdog Fantasy and you use promo code FLOCK, you will get that 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. You'll get a free team review in the live stream that we're doing every single night, and you'll get that free Josh Allen pick as well. Just make sure, if you wanted the free team review that we are doing in the live streams every day, you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as your account on Underdog Fantasy. That way I know to hook up with that free team review voucher. But thank you again. I really do appreciate you and really hope we get to see you out with the live stream later today.